Hello and welcome to Narayana IAS. Students, in today's DNA session, we'll be focusing on three most important topics from the Hindu paper. The first article, we are going to understand why Ladakh is demanding for 6th schedule or inclusion of Ladakh into the 6th schedule. This is the first topic. Let's try to understand several dimensions associated with this topic. For example, what is asymmetrical federalism, what is 5th schedule, what is 6th schedule, right? So this is the first topic that we are going to focus on. The second topic that we are going to focus on is a scheme introduced by the Prime Minister of our country for the empowerment or betterment of the scheduled tribes. Right, so we'll understand about the scheme and we'll also understand about the status of scheduled tribes. In the third article, we are going to understand a key term known by the name red diplomacy. So we'll understand what exactly red diplomacy indicates or refers to. Right, so these are the three topics that we shall be discussing, and finally we shall be discussing few practice questions so that you understand if you understood all the three topics that we are covered in the DNA session, right? So students, let's begin with the first topic, right? So the title of the first topic is what special status is Ladakh seeking, right? Now in this article, we'll try to understand two key terms. One is what is asymmetrical federalism that the Indian Constitution had adopted. One. The second one is the 5th and the 6th schedule, right? Now these two terms are very important both from the prelims perspective as well as the mains perspective, right? And you can map this particular topic under GS paper 2. So under GS paper 2 we have functions and responsibilities of the union and the state, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. So the question is whether asymmetrical federalism, right, it disturbs the federal structure of a country or no. India is a federal country, but does asymmetrical federalism violate the tenets of the federal structure of a country, right? So what is the context? The context is that Ladakh is seeking inclusion under the 6th schedule, right? Which means Ladakh is demanding from the central government that please include Ladakh into the 6th schedule. Why? So as to get more autonomy and protection for the tribal population in the Ladakh region. We'll understand what one understands by the term greater autonomy or protection for the tribal population, right? Arunachal Pradesh as well as Manipur are other states requesting the central government that these states should be added or included under the 6th schedule. Now, what exactly are these 5th and the 6th schedules? Now, these two schedules were created why? To protect the tribal rights and autonomy, especially of the people in the northeast India or people who inhabit the tribal region. The purpose is to protect the tribal rights, right? So the purpose of 5th and the 6th schedule is to give more autonomy, more independence to the tribal population, thereby protecting the tribal rights, right? What does it mean? Which means that when I say that giving more autonomy or more power or protecting the tribal rights, which means that there would be a local government of local people, that is the tribal people. Now these local government, right, these local government full of tribal people would govern land, resources and cultural matters, which means when it comes to land transactions, right, or for that matter how the resources are to be allocated, or for that matter the cultural practices, it is the local government who decide with respect to the land transactions, resource allocation, which means, in short, the central and the state government laws won't be applicable in the tribal areas, or they would be applicable with certain modifications, right? Which means under the 5th and the 6th schedule, we are giving the tribal people or the tribal population more independence or more power, so that without the interference of the central government or the state government, the tribal people or population can manage their resources for the benefit of the tribal population. Now, these provisions, which provisions? The 5th schedule, the 6th schedule. These provisions can be traced back to the British colonial practices, which means the 5th and the 6th schedule is the product or result of the laws the British government had framed. This is the context. It's okay if you have not understood the entire 3 points or the 3 points that we discussed. Please have patience, you'll understand all these terms one by one, right? First and foremost, what is asymmetrical federalism? Symmetry is same, asymmetry is not the same, right? Now, asymmetrical federalism refers to a system in which different states or regions within a federation have varying degrees of autonomy and powers rather than uniform distribution of powers across all states. Which means here we have the central government, right? Then we have the state government. Then we have the local government. Now the question is whether the powers given to all the states are same or they are not the same. What do you mean by federation? Federation, which means power is not concentrated in one single entity. So, for example, federation means that the powers, the central government, or for that matter, the constitution is dividing the powers of the central government and the state governments. Not all the powers are in the hands of the central government. The powers, the constitution has also given powers to the state governments and the local governments. This is what we understand by federation, that is, you are dividing the powers between the central government and the local governments. But in asymmetrical federalism, the powers, please focus on each and every word carefully. The powers given to each and every state government is not the same. Under asymmetrical federalism, the powers of each and every state is not the same, which means some states might have more powers compared to other states. For example, Jammu and Kashmir, Article 370. So through Article 370, Jammu Kashmir had more powers or more independence as compared to other states, right? In symmetrical federations like the US, Australia, all the states enjoy the same set of powers. Symmetrical, which means the powers that is given to one state is given to each and every state. But in asymmetrical federalism like India, Canada and Spain, it allows, or the constitution of their country allows some states to have more power or more autonomy or more independence. Some regions to exercise greater powers or special privileges. Why? Why are these states given special privileges? Because of their unique historical, cultural or socio-political circumstances. Which means because of these characteristics, some states are given more powers. This is what we understand by asymmetrical federalism. Symmetry, the power or the powers of each and every state is the same. Asymmetrical federalism, the powers are not the same. Some states are given more or special privileges, right? Now, in India, the constitution of our country has adopted asymmetrical federalism, right? Which means in our country, the Indian constitution has allowed some states to enjoy more autonomy and more privileges than the other states. What is the purpose? Why did the Indian Constitution allow some states or regions to have more privileges? Because to protect the distinct identities of various ethnic, linguistic or tribal groups. Right? For example, Article 370, which gave a special power to Jammu and Kashmir, or for that matter, the 5th and the 6th schedule, which govern the tribal areas. Right? So, these Article 370, 5th and the 6th schedule, or for that matter, Article 371. Now, Article 371 gives special privileges to the northeastern states. These are the examples: Article 370, 5th, 6th schedule, 371 article. These are the examples of asymmetrical federalism in our country. Alright. Now, we'll try to understand why these states were given more powers, or for that matter, autonomy. Right. Don't have this parochial understanding that this should not be the case. Some states should enjoy more powers. Why should some states enjoy more powers than others? Don't have this narrow mindset or narrow understanding. Try to understand the entire context. Then you'll understand why did the founding fathers of Indian Constitution adopted asymmetrical federalism. Just to help you understand the importance of asymmetrical federalism, let me just tell you that it is because of asymmetrical federalism our country has stood the harsh time that we had to experience since independence. For example, when India got independent, many political scholars in the West, they opined that India is a country of many diversities. Many different groups, religions, castes, communities, ethnic communities, linguistic groups. Our country will not stay united for more than 5 years. This is what the Western powers or political scholars had opined about our country. But it is because of certain features like asymmetrical federalism that we stood the harsh times, and even today we are a strong and a united country. Yes, there are challenges. Every state has some or the other challenges, but we have been successful in staying united for more than 70 years now. This is one of the reasons, asymmetrical federalism. We'll understand what exactly is asymmetrical federalism, or why did some states enjoy more powers, right? Now, here we'll try to understand why the states were given more powers, right? India's asymmetrical federalism, right? It balances the needs of unity in a diverse country. In a diverse country as India, it is important to stay and be united by allowing some states more autonomy to protect their unique culture and socio-political structures. For example, Ladakh is currently advocating for inclusion under the 6th schedule, seeking more autonomy for its tribal population, right? So, yeah, see, when India got independent, right? So, we integrated the princely states, right? When India got independent, not all the regions were agreeing to integrate with the Union of India, right? Which means not all the regions were comfortable in ceding their autonomy to a central government. For example, Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, Hyderabad, Travancore, Junagadh, and many such other princely states were not comfortable to give away their power and be a part of the Indian Union. They rather envisaged to remain independent as an independent country. However, the political leaders of the Congress, right, they understood that if there will be many fragments or many different countries surrounding India, then that might lead to many problems. And as a reason, the politicians, or for that matter, the political scholars were very confirmed or very sure that we need to integrate all these countries. But how would all the countries agree to be a part of Union of India? Which means you need to give them certain privileges, certain rights. For example, when it comes to tribal people, see, when it comes to the tribal population, these tribals or the people who live in the tribal inhabited place, they actually live in a coexistential relationship with the forest, which means for them the forests are their homes. They live in a natural coexistential relationship with the forest, which means you try to take them away from the forest and they will hit back. That is how closely they are attached to the forest. And they believe that they have rights over the forest lands. Now, the tribals, they fear that if they integrate with the Union of India, they might lose the rights they had over the forest rights or the forest land. Or they fear that once they be a part of the Indian Union, they might lose their cultural uniqueness. In order to dissuade their fears, the Indian government said that please integrate with the Union of India, don't fear, we'll make sure that we'll have separate provisions, special privileges for you, so that once you integrate with the Union of India, these special privileges or safeguards will always protect your culture, your language, and the uniqueness of your community. And that's the reason the Indian government introduced the concept of asymmetrical federalism by allowing the communities, the tribal communities, have more rights and more privileges than the other states. Once the tribal community got to know, okay, now we are going to get more privileges, which means with respect to the allocation of resources or protecting our culture, the central or no government would intervene. Once they got this confirmation or assurity from the central government or the political leaders, these communities agreed to be a part of the Union of India. This is how we integrated all the princely states, which means we had to give certain privileges to the tribals in order to win their trust. Right? Now, we discuss in the context that the 5th and the 6th schedule, these schedules are the result or they are result of the laws framed by the British government. What does it mean? It means that the British government had actually framed this 5th and the 6th schedule, and the Indian government post independence carried forward these special privileges. Now, the 5th and the 6th schedule, right? These provisions are the product of the laws made by the British government. For example, the Government of India Act 1935. Now, under the Government of India Act 1935, the British categorized the tribal areas as one excluded, the other one is partially excluded, which means all the tribal areas were categorized into excluded and partially excluded. These excluded and partially excluded were tribal dominated regions where the British interference was minimized, which means the British government said that okay, through this excluded and partially excluded regions, we are not going to intervene in your cultural practices, in your political practices, socio political circumstance structure. We are not going to intervene. Why did the British government allow them to enjoy special privileges? Because when the British government tried to, or when they tried to interfere or take away the forest rights from the tribals, the forests or the tribals hit back at the British. For example, you will study in modern history, Bastar Rebellion, Santhal Rebellion, Kol Rebellion, Munda Rebellion. So these rebellion actually fought against the British government. Why? Because the British government was trying to take away the forest rights, the tribal rights away from the tribals. So these tribals came together and rose together and led a rebellion to make the British government understand that no one can interfere in our structure. And that's the reason the British government introduced the concept of excluded and partially excluded regions, thereby assuring the tribal community that we are not going to intervene in your matter, right? Now, the excluded areas and partially excluded. The excluded areas consisted mostly of hilly and remote tribal regions in the northeastern India. The excluded. Whereas the governor held significant powers, which means when it comes to excluded areas, the governor enjoyed more powers. In partially excluded areas, central and the provincial laws. Central is the central government. Provincial is the provinces, that is the state laws, were applicable but with certain modification, which means excluded, the governor had more powers. In the partially excluded, the laws made by the central and the provinces were applicable with certain modifications, which means only when the governor approves, those laws will be applicable. The primary objective of these excluded and partially excluded areas was to isolate the tribal areas from mainstream governance and safeguarding their unique culture and the social practices. The purpose was that let us try to respect the culture of the tribals by excluding them from the mainstream governance so that the tribals won't create a problem to the British government, or to run our country, the tribals won't create any problem, right? So these actually uh, certain privileges, excluded and partially excluded areas, these concept or privileges which were given to the tribal people was given, one, to keep away the tribals from the mainstream governance, or for that matter to keep the tribals away from the independence movement, so that the tribals should have no idea about the independence movement going on in our country, and second, to safeguard their cultural and the social practices, right? Which means the fifth and the sixth schedule can be traced back to the British colonial practices. Now, what is fifth schedule? It covers areas predominantly inhabited by the tribal communities in 10 states. Fifth schedule, it covers scheduled areas. Now, which are these scheduled areas? These are the areas inhabited by the tribal population. And which are the 10 states? These are the 10 states. These are the 10 states where we see the scheduled areas inhabited by the tribal population. The purpose is to protect the rights of the scheduled tribes over land and resources, ensuring their socio-economic development. This we understood in the first slide. That is, there will be no interference from the central government or the state government with respect to managing the tribal land or the resources belonging to the tribals or the forest. The Tribal Advisory Council, which this is the local government. This is the local government, and these government, that is the Tribes Advisory Council, will take decision on behalf of the tribal population. Central government, state government will not intervene. And this TAC consists of mostly tribal MLAs, right? Are established to provide guidance on tribal welfare in these states. Now, the governor of the state, for example, the governor of Maharashtra, with the approval of the central government, can make regulations concerning land transfers, money lending, and other businesses, which means whenever the governor has to approve certain business in the scheduled area, then the governor has to seek permission from the central government. So, fifth schedule can be considered as partially excluded. Partially excluded. So, we discussed, right, the British government categorized the tribal areas as excluded and partially excluded. Fifth schedule can be understood as partially excluded, and the sixth schedule, excluded areas. The sixth schedule is applicable to only 4 northeastern states. Please memorize this fact for your prelims. Is applicable only to the 4 northeastern states, and these are the 4 northeastern states. For the fifth schedule, we have the Tribes Advisory Council. For the sixth schedule, we have an autonomous region known by the name Autonomous District Council. This is nothing but local government in the 4 northeastern states. So, sixth schedule is only applicable to 4 northeastern states. Now, this council, Autonomous District Council ADC, consists of elected members and holds significant powers, which means they have law making power, judicial power, administrative functions or matters like land, forest, shifting, cultivation, inheritance of property, marriage and divorce, and social customs, which means the sixth schedule has more rights than the fifth schedule. The rights mentioned in the sixth schedule are more than the fifth schedule, which means they can make laws. Fifth schedule, they cannot make laws. Sixth schedule, they can make laws, judicial power, administrative powers. They can also manage primary schools, healthcare, roads, markets, and cities. For example, let's say people in Maharashtra or the tribal people in Maharashtra cannot make laws, cannot have judicial, they do not have judicial powers. But the people in the 4 northeastern states have these powers. They can also impose taxes. They also have the financial power. This is how strong the autonomous district councils in the northeast or the northeastern states have. We discussed they also have judicial powers, which means they can constitute courts for adjudicating the disputes. So if there's any dispute, they can constitute the courts. Autonomous district council, which means the sixth schedule, they enjoy more rights and more privileges than the fifth schedule, right? Now, fifth schedule, sixth schedule, these are the two examples of asymmetrical federalism. We also discussed that Article 371. Article 370 is no more function. Why? Because it was abrogated by the Indian Parliament, right, in 2019. But when it comes to Article 371 is another example of asymmetrical federalism, just like the fifth and the sixth schedule. Now, these are the states, right? These are the states that get protection or special rights and privileges in the northeastern states. So, Article 371 is applicable to the northeastern states. Now, you do not have to exactly remember the special powers and privileges the northeastern states have. All you need to understand is that Article 371 is applicable to the northeastern states. Sixth schedule applicable only to 4 states. Article 371, these are the states that are covered under Article 371. Right? So, please remember Article 371 pertains to the northeastern states. Now, we understood what is fifth schedule, what is sixth schedule. Article 371 being applicable to the northeastern states. Does it mean that all the powers and privileges given to the tribal population is implemented? No, unfortunately no. There is a problem, or implementation of these privileges are not as per the stated objectives or intended objectives or goal, which means somehow we observe that there is a problem in implementation, which means the powers and privileges under 5th schedule, 6th schedule, 9th schedule are not implemented in letter and spirit. That's the reason we need reforms. We have to ensure that the laws or the privileges are implemented in letter and spirit. The first, implementation gaps. Yeah. So although the provisions offer significant powers, right, the autonomous district councils in tribal areas, the four northeastern states, right, these powers often remain underutilized due to the political interference and bureaucratic hurdles. In practice, the autonomy of these areas is frequently limited. We discussed that whenever the governor has to make any changes, the governor has to take approval from the central government. Now, however, we have often noticed that the central government or the state government intentionally delays taking decisions because of the political factors. So, somewhere it is because of the political factors, at times we see that the decisions get delayed. This is one problem. In short, the powers that we have discussed under 5th and the 6th schedule and Article 371 is not implemented. 1. Expansion of scheduled areas. Now, there are many tribal dominated areas across India that are not yet officially recognized as scheduled areas, which means under 5th schedule there are 10 states, and under, it's not that all the tribal communities in those 10 states are covered. No, there are some tribes that are covered under the 5th schedule. 6th schedule is the same. But the author is trying to say that there are many areas or many tribal communities that should be accorded the same amount or same degree of protection as accorded to states and communities under the 5th and the 6th schedule. Which means, in short, there are some areas and some tribal communities that are not covered under the 5th and the 6th schedule. The author tries to say that even these areas and tribal communities should be included under 5th and the 6th schedule. For example, you may please note down these examples. No one is going to help you with these examples. Lahul Spiti, these regions in Himachal Pradesh, right? Then Uttarkashi, Chamoli and Pittorgarh, these areas in Uttarakhand. Then Nashik, Palghar and parts of Surat and Valsad, these areas in Maharashtra and Gujarat are some areas inhabited by the tribal population but are not covered under 5th or the 6th schedule or the Article 371, which means even these committees should be given the same constitutional protection as we give to states under 5th schedule and the 9th schedule. The 125th Constitutional Amendment Act, that is bill, currently pending in Rajya Sabha, seeks to grant more financial, executive and administrative powers to existing ADCs, which means this law intends to give more powers to the autonomous district councils set up under the 6th schedule. They already have more powers, but again this bill tries to give more powers to the ADCs, right? The government of India has formed a committee. However, the most important point is the government of India has to expedite and make sure the bill is passed in the parliament as soon as possible so that the tribals enjoy more rights and privileges through which they can protect their rights, right? Now, as we discussed, Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh, as of now, they are demanding that these states be included under the 6th schedule so that their states get more legislative, financial, executive, administrative, judicial powers. Recognition of forest rights. Now, what is this Forest Right Act of 2006? Now, this act ensures that the tribals are getting the forest rights, the rights that the tribals somehow could not enjoy because of the bureaucratic hurdles and because of corruption, mal-governance. This act tries to remedy the problem by ensuring that the tribal community has rights over the forest land, right? And this is important to maintain or preserve their culture. So, In essence, what we need to understand is that asymmetrical federalism is not a bad idea. It makes sure that the Indian constitution is taking care of the people who are not as advanced as the people in the mainstream society are, which means the tribal community, they have their own unique culture, unique social and political structure that the Indian constitution needs to protect. So here we need to find unity in diversity. And how do we do it? By making sure that people of different communities, ethnic communities, are protecting their culture, unique culture, be it religious culture, be it any structure that they have, and making sure that everyone in a country is living in harmony by practicing their cultural practices which they have been following since centuries. And this the central government or the Indian state has done by the introduction of asymmetrical federalism and the fifth and the sixth schedule. So going forward, we need to ensure that we need to strengthen the fifth and the sixth schedule asymmetrical federalism so that we make sure that people are actually enjoying the special privileges that they are given or gifted by the Indian constitution. I hope you have understood each and every dimension that we have covered in the first article. Right, students? So, if there are any questions, feel free to ask me. Now, let us try to understand the second topic. What is the second topic? It is about a scheme that the Prime Minister of our country has introduced for the betterment of the tribal community. And what is the name of the scheme? The name of the scheme is Dharti, Aaba, Janjatiya. Janjatiya is the tribal community, the tribes. Gram Utkarsh Abhiyan, right? So we'll understand about the scheme and we'll understand about the status of scheduled tribes in our country, right? You may mark this for prelims or means GS paper 2. Under GS paper 2, we have a subtopic in the name, the welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population by the center and the states and the performance of these, right? So, what is the context? The Prime Minister launched this particular scheme, a welfare package aimed at ensuring saturation of basic schemes in tribal majority villages, which means here the government of India intends to ensure that all the schemes meant for the empowerment of tribal community is implemented in letter and spirit, right? So, this initiative was named in honor of tribal leader Birsa Munda. It seeks to implement 25 interventions, which means all the schemes meant for the empowerment to make sure that these schemes are implemented in letter and spirit, right? So, the focus is on improving infrastructure, education, healthcare, and overall socio-economic development, right? Now, these are some of the schemes meant for the empowerment of tribal communities. The first one is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. The purpose is to provide affordable housing for the tribal families. One. Second, see, when it comes to the OBCs, the SCs, the STs, right, the transgenders, right, women, you need to remember at least 4 to 5 schemes, right, because these are the vulnerable sections of our society, right? So, in case you get a question, be it in essay, ethics, or let's say any of the GS paper, make sure that you mention the schemes meant for the empowerment of the vulnerable sections. Then the next we have the National Fellowship and Scholarship for Higher Education for the Scheduled Tribe students, right? It supports ST students who are pursuing higher education, right? Third is the Aishman Bharat, covering the health sector. The fourth one is the One Bandhu Kalyan Yojana. It focuses on improving the infrastructure for quality education, income generation, and improving the quality of the life of the people. Next is the Forest Right Act. We discussed in the previous topic. This act makes sure that the tribals are actually enjoying the rights they have on the forest, right? Now, these are some of the constitutional protections or provisions or safeguards meant for the protection of the tribal population. First is Article 342. Please make sure that you remember all these constitutional protection or safeguards. First one is Article 342. It empowers the president. Very important. In the exam, they might trick you by mentioning it empowers the governor or chief minister or prime minister or the minister of Ministry of Tribes. It empowers the president to notify scheduled tribes in different states and union territories. President has the power to notify the scheduled tribes. Very important for your prelims. These tribes are identified based on characteristics such as isolation, distinctiveness in lifestyle, and backwardness. Right? Article 244 provides for the administration of tribal areas through 5th and the 6th schedule that we discussed in the before or the before talk, right? Article 366 defines scheduled tribes as communities recognized in Article 342 and Article 330 and 332. They provide reservation of seats in parliament and state assemblies for the scheduled tribes. So when it comes to ST, make sure that you remember all these facts. All these articles are important for you to remember. Article 342, we Article 244, Article 366, Article 330 and Article 332. Make sure that you remember all these constitutional safeguards and protection. Now, some facts and data. The STs make up 8.6% of India's total population. Major states with ST population are, these are the states, right? When it comes to scheduled areas under 5th schedule, please remember what we discussed in the first topic. It is governed under the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule, which means for the 5th schedule we have the Tribes Advisory Council, 6th schedule we have the Autonomous District Council, right? So this was about the second topic, right? So make sure that you remember certain data, facts about the STs, schemes meant for the empowerment of STs, and then most importantly, it is important to remember certain welfare schemes, or for that matter, the constitutional safeguards or constitutional provisions for the scheduled tribes, right? Now, the third article that we are going to discuss is the China-Vietnam Red Diplomacy. Though this article talks more about China and Vietnam, how China and Vietnam, now these two countries have certain disputes, but these two countries are trying to, sort out the differences and come together, work together, collaborate on different areas, and make sure both the countries or the region is growing and developing, right? So, in this article, we'll focus more on the red diplomacy, right? And you may mark this for prelims GS paper 2, right? Yeah. What is the context? The president of Vietnam is on a visit to China, right? The purpose is to sort out the differences and work together. This is the purpose, and that's the reason the president of Vietnam is on a visit to China, right? The visit focus on strengthening these strategic ties, economic collaboration, and shared socialist ideologies, right? Now, India has remained a very important country for Vietnam, which means India has tried to leverage the cultural and strategic ties with Vietnam, which means for India, Vietnam is a very important country. Similarly, for Vietnam, India is also a very important country, which means given the way China is trying to dominate the region, India is not happy, neither is Vietnam. So, we two countries are coming together to counterbalance the hegemony or heft of China in the region. The way China doesn't listen to anyone. China bothers less about any country. They do what they feel or think is right. They do not follow the international rules. And this is creating problem to the other countries, especially the China's neighbors. So India and Vietnam are also coming together to counterbalance the China's growing might. This is the context. Now let's focus on red diplomacy. Now what is red diplomacy? It refers to the diplomatic efforts and strategic alliances between countries that share a common ideological foundation in communism or socialism. Let's try to understand this term. Red diplomacy. Diplomatic efforts and strategic alliances between countries. Now these alliances are between countries that share common ideological foundation. For example, Vietnam had a communist government. China still has a communist government, which means we know in the 18th century, at the peak of industrial revolution, capitalism was at its peak. Which means what is capitalism? Based on your talent, innovation, you produce more and make more profits. No one is going to stop you. So the industrialists, right, the owners of the company, what they did is they made people work for 18 hours a day, exploited them and maximized their profits. This is capitalism. The state will not interfere. Based on your innovation, potential, you do whatever you feel like. This should actually benefit the country. Given that the people were suffering because of capitalism, came the concept of communism. Communism said that in capitalism, what is the key or key thing? That there's greed. There's greed, so people want to earn more and more money, more and more wealth, more and more property. Under communism, Karl Marx said that there will be no private property. Everything will belong to the community. There will be no private property. So, in countries like China, Vietnam, or many such countries, Cuba, where the capitalists were actually ruling, or let's say 1% of the population was ruling over the 99% of the population. So the common people in these countries, they rose into a rebellion and fought against the monarchs or the lords, and they finally actually overthrew or dismantled their government. For example, in Russia we had the Tsars, right? In China we had the Qing and the Ming dynasty. So the common people in China, Vietnam, they actually came together and fought against the warlords, or for that matter the monarchs, aristocrats. And finally they established a communist government, which means now there will be no private property. However, no country is purely a communist country. Now, in order to reach to communism from capitalism, socialism. What is socialism? For example, India adopted socialism after 1947 when India became a free country. Socialism says that the state and the private people, the private players, both would coexist. But the state will dictate terms and policies. Which means, let's say for example, I am an industrialist. Let's say I manufacture, right? I manufacture vehicles. Now the state will tell me how many vehicles I can produce or manufacture. I cannot manufacture as per my understanding. As per the state's policies, I have to manufacture only those number of vehicles. This is socialism, where state actually regulates each and everything, However, the private people are free to use their innovation talent and see that they maximize their profits. This is socialism. So the step towards communism was through socialism. Under socialism, the common people will have the control over the state resources, and with time, with the passage of time, the state will desettle and everything will belong to the community. However, communism never came into practice. What we see in major part or major places of the world is socialism, that is the state tries to dictate. Now in some countries, for example USA or the western countries, capitalism, which means there is no major control over the private players. The private people are free to manufacture, produce, develop as per their potential. Facebook is an example of capitalism. I have the talent, I have the innovation, I can create what I want to, which will help the common people, right? So red diplomacy is a diplomatic and strategic alliance between countries that had common ideological foundation. And what is that ideological foundation? It is communism. Vietnam and China had communist governments. This is known as red diplomacy. It highlights the political, historical and ideological ties between such states. For example, the relationship between China and Vietnam is rooted in their shared communist ideologies, which means the people in these countries, the common people, came together, fought against the aristocrats, monarchs, and established the communist government in these countries. This is what we understand by red diplomacy. Now, Gulf of Tonkin is a disputed territory that was in the news. Why? Because China was trying to claim its rights over this particular region. Where is Gulf of Tonkin? It is important to remember this location, right? So this is the Gulf of Tonkin. This is Vietnam, this is China, and this is the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, Vietnam and China both were contesting this particular region. China said it's mine, Vietnam said it's mine. So both these countries had or still have maritime disputes in this Gulf of Tonkin. And it's a very, very important place. Why? Because the trade passes through this region, right? So it's a very important maritime route. So please remember this Gulf of Tonkin and make sure that in your map you are actually marking this particular Gulf of Tonkin, right? Now talking about India and Vietnam. Now both these countries, both India and Vietnam, the relationship is characterized by strategic, economic and cultural cooperation. Now under the Mekong Ganga Corporation, what is Mekong? Mekong is a river. Now this is a homework to you. You need to find out the countries from where the Mekong river passes. This is your homework. So the countries from where Ganga and Mekong river flows, these countries have come together to establish Mekong Ganga cooperation. Now under this framework, India has completed 45 quick impact projects in Vietnam and is supporting cultural heritage restoration like the Meissen UNESCO World Heritage Site, which means we are actually helping Vietnam with respect to preserving their cultural uniqueness or cultural sites, right? Now, both these countries, India and Vietnam, have experienced resistance against colonialism. India, we fought against the British government. Vietnam fought against the United States. Now, there's a bloody war because of the United States intervention in Vietnam. Thousands and lakhs of people got killed. So, both these countries experienced resistance against the colonial powers. India fought against the British, Vietnam fought against the United States, and both the countries have a considerable support or people supporting and following Buddhism. India's Act East policy aims to deepen ties. Now, what is India's Act East policy? Now, under India's Act East policy, we intend to enter into partnership with the eastern countries or the southeastern countries. For example, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, eastern countries, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, which means under India's Act East policy, we are trying to integrate with these countries so that there is more trade, more development, more business, more welfare of the, right? So under India's Act East policy, we are trying to establish relationship and make our relationship strong with the countries that I just mentioned. Now, the two countries collaborate in areas such as defense, trade, technology, and maritime security. As I told you that China and Vietnam have territorial disputes, maritime disputes. India and China also have border disputes. As China is trying to pressurize both these countries, both the countries are coming together to work with each other in defense related areas to counterbalance China's growing hegemony or power in the region. For example, in the Indo-Pacific region, right? In the Indo-Pacific region, for example, both the countries collaborate in military exercises like the Windbags and Milan exercise. Now, this point is very, very important for your prelims examination. Please remember the name of the military exercise between India and Vietnam. It is Windbags and Milan exercise. So the purpose is that the militaries of both countries, they actually collaborate, they work together so that whenever situation comes, these two countries are efficient to fight against the enemy. This is the purpose of the military exercise, right? So India also gifted INS Kirpan. Now what is this? This actually is a warship. It's a warship with anti-submarine capabilities. This warship has the potential capability to destroy a submarine, and this warship is meant to protect the or to defend the coastal region. INS Kirpan. We gifted this to Vietnam. The point is that both the countries are working in these strategic areas like defense, technology, and making sure that we fight against the enemy in a far more efficient manner, and the enemy should not try to take advantage of the vulnerability, right? Yeah. So these were the three topics of the day. Now, to understand, if you understood all these three topics, let us try to discuss few questions. Question number one, the Gulf of Tonkin recently in the news due to ongoing territorial disputes is located between which of the following countries? We just discussed it. Very simple. It is China and Vietnam. Right? The next. This is with respect to Article 342 of the Indian Constitution. It empowers the President to notify scheduled tribes in different states and union territories. Yes, this statement is correct. The second, once a tribe is notified as a ST by the President has no power to amend the list. Parliament has no power. Wrong. The Parliament has the power to amend the list. So this statement is incorrect. Tribes identified under 342 are based on characteristics such as isolation, distinctiveness in lifestyle, and backwardness. Even this statement is correct. So statement 1 and 3 are correct. Now these statements or this such type of questions you'll better understand once you complete Indian polity. So in case you are not completed Indian polity, don't worry, wait until you complete the subject, because fifth schedule article 342 is discussed deeply or greatly in Indian polity. So statement is 1 and 3, option B is the correct answer for question number 2. Now let's discuss mains practice question. Analyze the significance of asymmetrical federalism in India with a reference to the 5th and the 6th schedules. Discuss the challenges faced in implementing these provisions and suggest reforms to enhance tribal autonomy and development. The question might seem to be big, but if you just try to break down the question, whenever you feel that the question is difficult to understand, always try to break down the question. Significance of asymmetrical federalism. In the introduction, first mention what is asymmetrical federalism. Define what is asymmetrical federalism by mentioning the examples of Article 370, 371, 5th and the 6th schedule. Then in the body, try to explain the significance of asymmetrical federalism. In the body, first mention what is 5th schedule and the 6th schedule. 5th schedule, scheduled areas in 10 states, right? In scheduled areas, we have the Tribes Advisory Council. Then in the 6th schedule, we have the Autonomous District Council meant for the protection of the tribes in 4 northeastern states. The purpose is to make sure that the tribal or the culture of the tribal community is protected by the constitution. This is the first part of the question. Second, discuss the challenges faced. For example, the provisions or autonomy is not practiced efficiently as stated in the constitution or under 5th and the 6th schedule. Then the tribal or the tribal committees still face problem with respect to registering their claim over the forest lands, right? Then there are bureaucratic hurdles, right? So these are some of the challenges that you may mention to address the second part of the question. And then in the conclusion, you have to mention that tribals, they form a very important part of the Indian society, and we have to make sure that we as a country ensure that the protection safeguards meant for the empowerment of the tribal community is implemented in letter and spirit. This is how you address the question. Introduction, body and conclusion. In the introduction, you can also mention that the STs, they constitute around 8.5% of the Indian population as per census 2011. So here, by mentioning us data, you are actually getting that 0.5 mark extra, and every mark counts in this examination. Right, students? So this was all about today's DNA session. I hope you understood each and every topic, and make sure that whenever you are listening to the DNA, make sure you are taking down the notes. Once the DNA is completed, try to close your eyes and try to recall all the points or all the topics that we discussed in the DNA. Right, students? Make sure that you are regular with the DNA lectures that we bring for you, and try to take the advantage as much as possible from the DNA lectures that we present before you every day. Students, if you really appreciate our hard work in bringing up this DNA for you, please support our initiative by hitting the like, subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Thank you.